Hey guys, so I decided to try a little experiment using AI. So I've used OpenAI ChatGPT to write a debate topic between Trump and Harris on their policies and what they can do better. And then I took the text and I went to Google's NotebookLM and I made a speech out of it. And here is the result.
All right, everybody, buckle up. We're diving headfirst into the 2024 election landscape, specifically the policy arena where, let me tell you, things are getting kind of heated between Trump and Harris. We're dissecting a hypothetical debate, and let me just say, it gets fiery.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a real clash of ideologies.
Yeah.
And honestly, it doesn't matter if you're a diehard Democrat or a rock-ribbed Republican. Understanding where these two stand on the issues, that's kind of crucial.
Couldn't agree more. So let's kick things off with the one that's always top of mind, right? The economy. What are they saying about keeping our wallets a little bit happier, huh?
Well, Trump's kind of sticking to his guns here. He's all about that pro-growth, tax cuts, deregulation playbook, right? That whole trickle-down economics thing. He'd argue it led to a booming economy, pre-pandemic, of course. And he's especially proud of those record-low unemployment numbers, particularly among minorities.
Right, he often touts how those communities directly benefited from his policies. But Harris, well, she sings a different tune about economic growth, doesn't she?
She does, yeah. She's all in on sustainable investments, healthcare, clean energy. Those are her drivers, she says, for long-term economic stability. And, she often points to the American Rescue Plan as, like, Exhibit A, credits it with helping families and small businesses bounce back from, the whole COVID economic roller coaster.
So it's like two totally different economic philosophies going head to head here, right? Trump wants to shrink the government, unleash the free market, whereas Harris, she sees a much more active role for the government, investing in what she sees as those key areas for growth.
And that difference, that's huge, right? Has major, major implications for, like, how much the government spends, what happens with taxes, even what kinds of jobs get created.
Okay, so how would these two playbooks actually play out in, like, your everyday life? Let's talk jobs, for instance. Trump would likely say, cutting taxes for businesses, that's the ticket to creating more jobs.
Yeah, exactly. The theory being businesses flush with cash from those tax cuts, they're going to expand, right? They're going to hire more people.
Hmm.
Harris, though, she'd likely point to investments in infrastructure as, like, the real job creator.
And she's a big fan of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, right?
Exactly. That legislation, which Trump opposed, is pumping billions into roads, bridges, broadband, clean energy projects, the whole nine yards. Her argument is this creates good-paying jobs, the kind that strengthen the economy for the long haul.
So under Trump, maybe you're seeing more job openings in the private sector, while under Harris, maybe there's more opportunities in like construction, renewable energy, those sorts of fields. What about, though, the cost of living? I mean, Trump's constantly hammering on, skyrocketing inflation under the current administration.
Yeah, and he blames that squarely on what he calls excessive government spending and that war on American energy, right? He claims that when he was in office, his focus on energy independence, remember him touting America as an energy exporter, he'd say that led to cheaper energy for everybody.
And cheaper energy. That trickled down to basically everything, right? I mean, transportation, manufacturing, what we pay for groceries, it all adds up.
Big time, yeah, total ripple effect. But this whole energy thing, this is where Harris comes in with a very different perspective. This is where we wade into that whole energy versus environment debate.
Right, because for her, climate change is like the big bad wolf.
Right.
Right. And investing in renewable energy, that's essential, even if it means, easing away from those fossil fuels. Which, of course, Trump sees as a direct shot at American jobs and energy independence.
It really shows how their economic policies and their environmental policies, they're all tangled up, right? So Trump, he's all about American oil, gas, even clean coal as the path to energy independence, lower prices, job creation, the whole shebang. Now, he's not against renewables, but he's adamant that they need to compete in the free market, no government handouts.
Unleash American energy, he often says.
Exactly. Meanwhile, you've got Harris, who's completely gung-ho about the U.S. leading the charge against climate change. For her, investing in renewables, it's not just about the planet. It's about jobs in a sector that's, booming.
Mm-hmm.
And this difference, again, it's not just talk, right? It affects everything.
Yeah.
What you're paying at the pump, the types of jobs you see popping up in your town, it's a big deal.
It really is like choosing between two different futures for the American economy, each with its own, potential perks and pitfalls.
Exactly. And it all boils down to what matters most to you, right? What values do you prioritize? What future are you voting for?
Okay, so we've tackled the economic battleground, but what about the issue that's often framed as a right, not a privilege? Let's talk healthcare.
Yeah, healthcare. I mean, talk about something that hits home for every single American,
Right.
right? And this is where, like, you really see how differently Trump and Harris think about this whole, taking care of people thing.
Totally. And I mean, let's face it, for a lot of people, this conversation, it always seems to circle back to Obamacare, doesn't it? The Affordable Care Act, I mean, it's been like the main character in this healthcare drama for years. So where do we stand? Are we going to see Trump try to hit the reset button again, repeal and replace, round two?
Oh, yeah, he's definitely bringing that back. For Trump, the Affordable Care Act, it's basically, government overreach. He wants to dismantle it, go a completely different direction with what he calls these market-based solutions. He truly believes that's going to mean lower costs, more choices for people.
More choices, hopefully without, giving everyone a heart attack when that medical bill shows up, which, yeah, lines up with his whole less government thing. But what about those prescription drug prices, though? That's got to be a major concern for a lot of our listeners. How's he planning to tackle that beast?
Well, he's dusting off some familiar plays from his playbook. More competition, that's a big one. Like, remember him talking about importing drugs, getting them cheaper from other countries, and he's still pushing for hospitals to be more transparent about their prices. Remember those drug price ads he wanted everywhere?
It was like we were going to start seeing those during prime time right alongside the car commercials. Not necessarily a bad thing, though, if it, shines a light on those costs. This is where Harris goes in a totally opposite direction, though, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Harris is, like, the ultimate defender of the Affordable Care Act. She sees it as this essential safety net that needs, if anything, to be, reinforced, expanded, definitely not torn down. For her, healthcare is not some luxury, it's a right. It's the government's job to make sure everyone has access, period.
That's a pretty huge philosophical gap between the two of them. So how does that actually translate into, real world policies?
Well, one of her big things is letting Medicare negotiate drug prices directly with those pharmaceutical giants.
Yeah.
Something Trump is totally against. Her argument is this is going to bring down costs for, millions of Americans. And she doesn't stop there. Capping insulin costs, boosting mental health services, those are high on her priority list, especially, after everything we've been through with the pandemic and all.
Yeah, mental health is something we definitely don't talk about enough. It's so important. So, let's bring this home for our listeners. Imagine you're dealing with a chronic illness, right? Maybe diabetes. And you're looking at those insulin prices, and it's just, impossible. Under Trump's plan, maybe you get a little breathing room if those imported drugs bring the price down. But then there's that whole question mark hanging over your head about coverage if the Affordable Care Act goes away.
Exactly. And with Harris, you've got the government actively trying to slash those insulin prices, which sounds great, but maybe you have fewer options if you're looking for, private sector solutions. It really highlights those tough choices, the trade-offs that come with both of their approaches. And speaking of tough choices, that kind of brings us to another one of those evergreen, hot-button issues, immigration. This is a topic where both candidates, well, you've got some pretty strong opinions, you could say.
Yeah, understatement of the year, maybe.
Right. Trump, he's all about that border security, doubling down on it even, stricter measures, you name it. And yeah, that wall, it's making a comeback in his speeches. He's also talking about bringing back that Remain in Mexico policy, the one where asylum seekers, they get to wait in Mexico while their cases go through here in the U.S.
Policies that, caused quite a bit of controversy last time around, to put it mildly.
To put it mildly, yeah. But for Trump, these are non-negotiables. He sees them as absolutely essential to getting a handle on illegal immigration, which, according to him, went through the roof under Biden and Harris. He'll point to his track record, how we got those illegal border crossings down, lowest in decades, he claims, and he firmly believes, going back to his old ways, that's the only way to get things back on track.
And where does Harris stand on all of this?
Harris. She thinks Trump's whole approach is, heartless and, frankly, useless. She wants to ditch what she calls the politics of fear and go for a total overhaul of the system, comprehensive immigration reform, address those root causes of migration from Central America, create a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who are already here. That's her focus.
So she's more about a compassionate approach, trying to really integrate people rather than just, building walls and making it harder for people to get here.
Exactly. She's pushing hard for a pathway to citizenship for dreamers, those kids who were brought here illegally when they were little. And it's not just them, it's essential workers, all these immigrants who are already here, contributing, she argues. Her view is, it's not just the humane thing to do, it makes economic sense too.
So we're seeing that same kind of clash of ideologies, right? Trump's all about enforcement, making it tougher, while Harris is leaning into a more welcoming, compassionate approach.
Exactly. Trump sees it through the lens of like national security, law and order, that kind of thing. Harris, she's leading with her heart, emphasizing the human cost and, how much immigrants contribute to our economy.
It's one of those issues that's just so multifaceted, you know? There's no easy answers, and it really speaks to those different visions of what America should represent in the world, how we should interact with other countries. Speaking of which, it's like we're shifting gears now, right? Moving from like domestic policy to the international stage. How do these two see America's place in the world? What kind of foreign policy are we talking about here?
Totally. Yeah. It's like zooming out to see the whole chessboard,
Yeah.
you know? And that's where you see that classic contrast between like Trump's America First philosophy and Harris's whole thing about diplomacy and alliances.
Because Trump, he's all about projecting strength, right? Like, he wants to renegotiate those trade deals, make them work better for American workers, and he's not afraid to, use military force if he has to. Peace through strength, that's his line.
Yeah, exactly. He'd say the U.S. should only get involved militarily if it's absolutely in our national interest. And our allies, they got to step up, contribute their fair share. He'll point to, like, his renegotiated trade deals, like the USMCA, the one with Mexico and Canada. He'd call those proof that his approach gets results. And then, of course, there's the Abraham Accords, right? Getting Israel and those Arab states to normalize relations. He sees those as major foreign policy wins, feathers in his cap.
Wins that he'd argue wouldn't have happened without him, without his tough stance, his, negotiation skills.
100%, yeah. He's convinced the U.S. has been getting taken advantage of for too long, and it's time to, walk in there and own the room.
Yeah.
But Harris, she's got a completely different take on how the U.S. should be throwing its weight around.
It's more about rebuilding those alliances, right? Working with other countries, not just going it alone, especially on big global issues like climate change, for example. Restoring America's global leadership. That's a phrase she uses a lot.
Yeah, exactly. She's all about diplomacy, working together, building those coalitions. That's how you navigate the world today, she'd argue. She thinks Trump's whole America First thing, it really did some damage, hurt relationships with key allies. So she wants to mend those fences, work together with other countries to tackle those big problems that, no one country can solve on its own.
So it's almost like two totally different playbooks, right, for dealing with the rest of the world. Trump's is all about, direct negotiations, striking deals one-on-one, and not being afraid to use the military. Harris is more into collaboration, diplomacy, working within those big international organizations.
That's a great way to put it. And it's not just about style. It has real consequences. I mean, think about it. This affects global trade, climate change, even the possibility of military conflict. It's a big deal.
No doubt. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we've covered a ton of ground here, haven't we? Economy, healthcare, immigration, foreign policy. We've looked at it all through the lens of this, hypothetical Trump-Harris showdown. So for our listeners, what are the key takeaways here as they try to, process all of this and get ready to vote?
Well, for me, the biggest takeaway is just how different these two candidates' visions for America really are. And I'm not just talking about individual policies. I mean, their whole approach to governing, their fundamental beliefs about what America should be, both here at home and on the world stage.
It's like you got to look beyond just agreeing or disagreeing with this policy or that policy, right? It's about those deeper questions, those big picture things, what role should the government play in people's lives? How should America act in the world? What are our values?
Absolutely. It's about asking yourself, what kind of future do I want for this country? What role do I think America should play in the world? Because those are the questions that matter.
Because those are the questions that, at the end of the day, will help you cut through all the noise of the election, all the slogans and the sound bites, and figure out what really matters to you, what kind of future you want to be a part of.
Exactly.
And that's what it's all about, right? Making your voice heard. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive, everybody. We'll catch you next time.